All right, everyone. Welcome back. Today we're going to be taking a look at my prediction for not just the 2020 gubernatorial elections, but also the 2019 gubernatorial elections, and I'm going to be giving my prediction. So I think most of these races will have to do with turnout. Or at least I think most of the races in 2019 will have to do with turnout. And I don't think there's going to be much of a turnout from either side due to the fact that this is an off year. And I think for that reasons, I don't see much of a change in the three states that are going to have gubernatorial elections in 2019, those being Kentucky, Mississippi, and Louisiana. So let's start with Kentucky first. So Matt Bevin, the incumbent Republican governor, is running against the Andy Beshear, who is the Attorney General. He was previously the son of Steve Beshear, who was the former Democratic governor. So not a bad candidate to run. And it is... Matt Bevin does have low approval numbers, and polling right now is pretty deadlocked, so that could give Beshear an advantage. But right now I'm going to say this one is lean Republican, and I'm going to say why. First of all, this is Kentucky, so I think that alone, I think, helps Bevin. I think the fact that it is Kentucky, the fact that it is an overwhelmingly Republican state, really helps. But the other thing is, I think if this were a midterm year, I think that would help Beshear out a lot more because their Democrats would have a lot more momentum on their side, and that would lead to a higher turnout from Democrats. But because there isn't, I'm going to say Kentucky is lean Republican. Going down to Mississippi, I'm actually going to say this one is likely Republican. Many Democrats are hoping they could make a pickup here because Jim Hood is a popular attorney general, and he is the Democrat running. But the problem is, again, it's an off year, and you're not going to see a huge turnout from Democrats or Republicans in an off year, which makes it more and more unlikely that traditionally red states are going to go blue, or that traditionally blue states are going to go red. You saw that, I think, in the North Carolina House race, where you saw the Republican winning by a bigger than expected margin. And the reason why was because it was in an off year. If you look at the elections with Doug Jones and Connor Lamb, where they managed to upset, they were on the verge of a midterm election. Democrats were motivated because they really wanted to do well during that midterm election, and they were willing to come out and vote for their candidates in a midterm election, in a race that is building up to a midterm election setting. However, this isn't a midterm election setting. This is an off year, and because it was an off year, I think Democrats weren't able to build up enough momentum in that one North Carolina House race, and that is why McCready lost. Because I think it's an off year, I think it's going to be harder for Democrats to gain more momentum, and I think that's going to lead to Tate Reeves holding on to this traditionally Republican seat. That's the first reason, I think. I think also another reason is most likely because right now, polling has shown Tate Reeves with a spike in polls. He's been going up in the polls, and Jim Hood has, the polls indicate that Jim Hood has a lot of ground to make up. So I think overall, because it is an off year, it's unlikely that you're going to see a lot of Democrats turn out. And I think that's going to help benefit the Republicans. Now, as for Louisiana, I'm going to say that I'm going to put that in the lean Democratic column. Again, it is a Republican state. That can't be understated, that this is a very overwhelmingly Republican state. And not to mention, they do have a strong Republican candidate running in Ralph Abraham. But the main reason I think that Louisiana will stay is because outside of the fact that John Bel Edwards is the incumbent, which is a big advantage, it's an off year again, and because it's an off year, you're not going to see that much turnout, and a lack of turnout from Republicans is definitely going to help the incumbent. But I still think, because of political gravity, it will be close. But I think ultimately, because Bel Edwards is the incumbent, he will hold on for a second term. So let's turn to the 2020 gubernatorial races. So first of all, let's look at Washington. Now that Jay Inslee has exited the presidential race, and now that he's gotten back into the gubernatorial race, I just don't see a way Republicans pick this one up in Washington. Utah, even though it is an open race, it's still Utah. It's still an overwhelmingly Republican state, and I expect that this one will stay in Republican hands. Now, this is during a presidential year, unlike with the 2019 races, which are being held in an off year. These are being held in a presidential year, which could lead to higher turnout in a lot of these races. So first of all, in North Dakota, overwhelmingly Republican state, not going to flip. In Louisiana, Indiana, I think I'm going to leave that in the likely Republican column. I don't see much of a way that Eric Holcomb loses, but still, it is a presidential election year, and you could see a higher turnout, which could hurt the incumbent Republican Eric Holcomb in an election year. As for Missouri, I'm going to characterize Missouri as lean Republican. I think that more likely than not, I do think that Mike Parsons has the upper hand, but I do think he does have a strong Democrat running against him in Nicole Galloway, so that could help Democrats. But on top of that, it is a presidential election year, and that could result in more turnout. However, it is still a Republican state, and Parsons is still the incumbent, so I'm going to characterize that as lean Republican. As for West Virginia, I'm going to characterize that as likely Republican. Again, I don't see much of a way that this flips. I will say that it is a presidential year, so you could see more turnout from Democrats, which could hurt Jim Justice. However, with Joe Manchin saying that he's not going to run in this race, I think that is a big downer for Democrats, because right now they just don't have that major of a candidate. Going over to Delaware, this is Joe Biden's home state. It's just blue territory. It's just blue country. Again, this is just where Joe Biden grew up. I mean, you could hold... There's nothing you could do to make Delaware flip Republican. So for that reason, I'm going to say that Delaware is safe Democratic. As for Vermont, I'll come back to Vermont. As for New Hampshire, I'm going to say... Should I put it in tilt or lean? I'm going to put it in lean right now, because I think that that Chris Sununu has the upper hand. He is the incumbent. But still, it is New Hampshire. It's still a bellwether. It's always going to be a hotly contested race there. and I think the presidential race on top of the ballot is definitely going to make it competitive. But Sununu is still the incumbent, and he is a popular incumbent, so I think that ultimately could help him. Vermont, believe it or not, I'm actually going to put that in the likely Republican column. I know what I just said about turnout and how that hurts Republicans a lot in presidential years, but the thing you got to remember is that the current governor, what's his name? Phil Scott. Phil Scott is... he managed to win by a pretty large margin in a presidential year in 2016, even though Hillary Clinton won Vermont by a blowout. So for that reason, I'm going to characterize it as likely Republican. As for North Carolina, I'm going to put that in the lean column. Again, it seems like every North Carolina gubernatorial race is competitive. So for that reason, I'm going to say that that's going to stay in that column. I also think that I think that the incumbent Roy Cooper is popular and he's well known, and that's going to help him. But it's still going to be a really hotly contested race on top of the ballot, and I do think you'll see a lot of that carry over into that race. And that leads us to the most competitive gubernatorial election going into the 2020 presidential election cycle, and that is Montana. Now, Montana is an overwhelmingly Republican state. I believe Trump won the state by around 21 points, and I think Mitt Romney won it by like 15 maybe. So definitely a red state. At the same time, Democrats do a very, very good job at the state level. In fact, not only is Steve Bullock the current governor of Montana, but there hasn't been a Republican governor since 2004 in Montana, which is pretty impressive considering their electoral record. So that helps them. Another thing that helps them is the fact that even though Democrats performed poorly in the U.S. Senate in 2018, John Tester still managed to win the U.S. Senate race. So that's definitely something that's going to help them. That's definitely something that gives Democrats, especially in Montana, a sign of hope. With that being said, though, in 2016, not only did Donald Trump win the presidential race at the top of the ticket, but every statewide election in Montana that year saw, in effect, as every statewide office in Montana, or every statewide election in Montana, went to the Republican. Secretary of State, that race went to the Republican. The auditor race went to the Republican. The Attorney General race went to the Republican. Not only did Donald Trump win by that state by a big margin, but every statewide race in 2016 went for a Republican in Montana, except for the gubernatorial race, where Steve Bullock managed to eke out a win, despite all of the odds. And I think the reason he was able to do that, part of it might have been because he was the incumbent and he was popular. So that definitely helps. And whichever Democrat wins the nomination for this seat in 2020 is not going to have that advantage because it is an open seat. And they're going to be running in extraordinarily Republican territory, which again isn't going to help if you're a Democrat. At the same time, though, the popular lieutenant governor who's been who's had a lot of experience in Montana, is really well known. Mike Cooney, again, he was the Secretary of State of Montana for a while. He also ran for governor once before, and he was president of the Montana State Senate. He took over when John Tester went to go join the U.S. Senate. So that definitely, so he is popular, and the Republican who is currently on track to win the nomination is Greg Gianforte, who is a very controversial candidate and lost statewide 4 years ago. So that could definitely hurt that definitely could hurt Republicans. Overall, definitely going to be a down to the wire race, but because of the mere fact that right now Gianforte is on top, and he may not be the best candidate to run, and because of the Democrats' record in regards to winning gubernatorial races in Montana, I'm going to say that Montana is tilting in the Democratic column. So there you go. That gives Republicans a majority with 27 seats. Democrats get 23 seats. That means there would be no change in the number of governorships. Let me know what you guys think. Do you agree with this characterization? Do you disagree? Let me know in the comments section below, and make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks.